Site Survey Fundamentals. In this video, we're going to learn about what a site survey is and what we should do in preparation for creating a RF site survey. So you're ready to get started? Excellent. So get your site survey cap on, because we're going to start off with first defining what a site survey is in the context of a wireless network. So to do that, we're going to bring up another whiteboard here. Now, in its most essential form, a site survey is really just a map or a guide for implementing a wireless LAN. And it's extremely important that a site survey be conducted before a wireless LAN is implemented to find out the key elements that are required for a wireless LAN and to find out any key elements that can cause problems to the wireless LAN. If you don't have an accurate site survey, you're kind of shooting in the dark. You're just kind of haphazardly just installing things, hoping things will work. However, if you conduct a thorough site survey to find out what the site looks like from a radio frequency perspective, to define what the radio frequency coverage area needs are, and find out any sources of interference, the type of equipment that you should be used, the optimal location for the equipment, the power requirements of your equipment, and the security that is required for the wireless LAN. So, as a minimum, a good site survey should contain these elements. So really, one of the most essential components of the site survey is that it provides information to the wireless LAN installer and to the client any areas that could cause problems with implementing a wireless LAN in the given facility. So for example, when you're conducting a site survey, you might encounter problems with a hidden node or near far or a multipath or very low bandwidth due to these problems, hidden node and near far, multipath, etc. So as a result, depending on the problem that you encounter or the problems that you encounter, you're going to recommend to the client a different type of equipment be used, or where the equipment should be placed, or you might even recommend changes be made to the facility. You might recommend that filing cabinets be moved, or desks be moved, or maybe ideally walls be moved as well to help deal with some of the wireless LAN issues that come up during the site survey. So it's better to find out any potential problems before you recommend purchasing specific equipment, before you install that equipment, only to find that problems occur with the equipment and the placement of the equipment that you had purchased and installed for the client. So really, you want to provide the installer and the client as much detailed information as possible in these key areas in order to meet the needs of the client and the budget of the client for the wireless LAN. Now, as the name conveys, a radio frequency site survey requires a physical survey using your wireless LAN equipment in order to find the radio frequency coverage area, in order to identify problems that might occur on the wireless LAN. However, there's a lot of things that you can glean about a site, about a company's facility, before you actually step on site. So there's a lot of preparation that you can do prior to actually conducting the site survey. So let's learn about those key preparation tasks that you should perform before you actually step on site by bringing up another whiteboard. So what we have before us here is a list of questions that you should find answers to before you actually step on site to perform the actual site analysis or the site survey. So we want to know what type of facility that we're going to perform the site survey at. We want to find out information about any existing wired or even wireless networks that they might already have. We need to know the goals and business requirements for the wireless LAN. We need to know if the wireless LAN is going to be indoor, outdoor, or a combination. We need to know bandwidth and roaming requirements. We need to know what type of resources are available for implementing the wireless LAN. And we also need to know, at a very minimum as well, the security requirements for a wireless LAN. So if we can gather as much information before we actually step on site, the actual time that we spend on site will be much more valuable. We won't have to ask these questions on site. We might need to clarify some needs and clarify some points. However, the majority of the basic questions will be answered prior to actually stepping on site. So it's going to save you time and it's going to save the client money. So this is not a definitive list of all the information you should have prior to stepping on site, but it's a list of the key elements that you really should and must have answers to before you actually conduct the site survey. So let's learn about the importance of asking these questions by learning about these questions one by one, first starting with company facility analysis, and to do that, let's bring up another whiteboard. Now, the very first question we need to ask is simply, what type of facility will the wireless LAN be installed in? Because there can be vastly different requirements for a wireless LAN depending on the facility that the wireless LAN is going to be installed in. So, for example, will the wireless LAN be installed in a hospital, a university, an airport, a warehouse, an office building, a retail store, or a coffee shop? There's going to be vastly different requirements for installing a wireless LAN in a hospital than in a coffee shop. So, for example, if you were tasked to install a wireless LAN or to perform a site survey for a wireless LAN at a hospital, you would need to find out, is this a clinic, is this a single building hospital, or is this a campus? Does the hospital have 5 buildings on the same physical ground? And with those 5 buildings, will they all need wireless connectivity? How many users will need access to the wireless LAN? You would need to know the type of equipment that at a hospital could cause interference with a wireless LAN. So each environment has its own idiosyncrasies. Also, with a hospital in the United States, they have to comply with very strict guidelines for keeping patient data confidential, and these guidelines are called HIPAA, H-I-P-A-A. This stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And the HIPAA requirements for protecting data that is transmitted electronically changed in the year 2003, so relatively recently. So you would need to ensure that when you're installing a wireless LAN in a hospital in the United States, whether or not you're in compliance with the HIPAA requirements. And if you rely solely on WEP for security for protecting the patient's records, you're probably not going to be in compliance with the HIPAA regulations. So by asking this one question, what type of facility is it, will typically lead to other questions which hopefully you'll get answers to. So for example, if you had not previously performed a site survey at a hospital, you would need to know the type of equipment that's going to be within the radio frequency coverage area of your wireless LAN, and you would typically need to do some homework about that equipment to find out whether or not it's going to cause interference with the wireless LAN that the client wants. So different types of facilities, the actual physical layout of the facility will also cause different interference problems as well. So for example, an airport will typically have a lot of large glass windows at the terminals and gates. Also, the size of the facility is going to vary the amount of time that it actually takes to conduct the site survey. So those are some of the typical things that can come up as a result of asking this question, what type of facility is it? But we also need to know information about existing networks. Let's bring up another whiteboard and learn about this. So we need to ask the client, do they have any existing networks? They'll probably have a wired network, but we also need to know, is there an existing wireless network, or are they starting from scratch? And if they do have an existing wireless network, we need to obtain as much documentation as possible of both their wired and wireless network. But if they have the wireless network, we need to know how many access points they have, what channels the access points are communicating on, the type of access points, what technology the access points are using, how many wireless clients there are, what type of throughput they currently have, what type of problems they're currently encountering with the wireless network. And these are all questions to help you determine, can they use the existing equipment that they have? Can the existing equipment be modified to fix some of the problems they have? Or will they need to upgrade their existing equipment or purchase existing wireless equipment? And you also need to sit down with the network administrator and ask very typical questions such as, where are the wiring closets of the existing network? So the optimal location for a wireless access point may not be anywhere near where the wiring closets are, so you'll have to adjust for that. You'll need to know other typical information such as what type of protocols are being used, what type of operating systems are being used by the servers and by the workstations. Are you using Windows? If so, what version of Windows? Are you using Unix? Are you using Novell? Are you using Linux, etc., etc., and find out what versions of the operating systems are being used. Because this will vary the type of support that's available on wireless stations. Windows XP has different support for wireless connectivity than does Windows 98 as an example. Also, another very critical question you want to ask is what type of naming convention is being used, if any? Is it just a haphazard bunch of names that somebody picked out of the air? I remember going to one network where they'd named all the servers Star Trek names. So this is kind of cool for the network administrator, but it's not very cool for the users in the company that want to have access to the servers. So ideally you want to have some type of logical naming convention in place that can in turn be applied to the wireless access points and wireless bridges. You also want to ask the network administrator what the current and future needs of the wireless network will be. So for example, does the company plan to hire a whole bunch of new salespeople within the next year or the next couple of years? And if so, will all those salespeople need access to the wireless network? So you'd need to plan for their needs now and their needs tomorrow. And ideally you would have access to their network topology as well. You would have some type of map of their existing network topology to find out where all the wiring closets are, etc. Now, something to bear in mind is in order to obtain the information that you're asking these questions for, you might typically have to sign some type of security document or a non-disclosure agreement document saying that you're not going to disclose this information. So do be aware of that before you go in. You might also have to obtain some type of security clearance as well in order to actually conduct the site survey on the client's premises at the actual facility. Now, in addition to finding out information about the existing wired or wireless networks, we also need to know what the goals and business requirements of the wireless network are. So let's learn a little more about that by bringing up another whiteboard. So we simply need to know, what do you want to do with this thing? What is the main purpose and the intention of installing a wireless LAN? What solution to what problem that you're having with your wireless network do you think the wireless LAN will provide your company? So for example, the intention of installing the wireless LAN might be to provide connectivity for a temporary office, maybe at a construction site, or for an outdoor event, or it could be a permanent structure within a company's network infrastructure. So again, this is an open-ended question which will probably lead to more questions, but by understanding what the goals and the business requirements of a wireless LAN are prior to actually doing the site survey, that can help to clarify equipment requirements and usage requirements and get that down on paper. So for example, maybe the client is a facility that hosts NASCAR races, and they want to have an outdoor wireless network so the different racing teams can use maybe handheld devices to be able to communicate with team members, or laptops, wireless laptops, so they can do configuration with the race cars or communicate back to a server that they might have brought with them. So by understanding what the business requirements of the wireless LAN are, or essentially how will the wireless LAN be used, that can put into motion ideas and suggestions for the equipment that will be required for configuring the wireless LAN infrastructure. So for example, the equipment that's going to be required for hosting an outdoor wireless LAN that's just used to provide connectivity for handheld devices is going to be considerably different, and the amount of equipment that will be used will be considerably different for a wireless LAN that needs to provide connectivity for laptops and desktops, or a combination of those two. So if in this example the client says, yes, we need an outdoor wireless LAN to provide connectivity for race teams at our racetrack, then that's going to bring up another set of questions about the wireless LAN location. So let's bring up another whiteboard and learn about that. So if our previous questions haven't already yielded the answer for the location of the wireless LAN, we need to explicitly ask, is the wireless LAN going to be located indoors, outdoors, or a combination of the both? So for example, a combination might be a coffee shop that requires wireless connectivity inside the coffee shop and then out on the patio. Now, if we do need to provide wireless coverage outdoors, there's a few things to take into consideration. Number one is the area that we need to provide wireless connectivity to subject to high wind gusts, either on a regular basis or on a seasonal basis. If it's subject to high wind gusts, then we'll probably need an open frame antenna design to minimize wind loading or wind gusts on directional antennas. Also, if an antenna is going to be mounted outdoors on an antenna tower, which is typically done in order to raise the antenna above some obstructions to provide a clear line of sight between two or more antennas, then there's some special guidelines that have to be adhered to within the United States. The towers that are more than 200 feet above ground level are required to be reported to the FAA before you actually construct these towers, before you actually set up the towers. So the key thing here is that if it's more than 200 feet above ground level, so the antenna might be installed on top of a building or at ground level, but let's say, for example, you place the antenna on top of a building that is 150 feet high, and the antenna is 60 feet high, well, then the total length from ground level, 150 plus 60, that gives you 210 feet. So you'll have to notify the FAA about this. You'll probably need to talk to a structural engineer about mounting the antenna on top of a rooftop of the building. You'll probably need to obtain some type of local permits in order to mount the antennas as well. So these are other considerations to take into consideration just for this one point here, if you're going to have an antenna tower or not. Now, you've probably heard in the news within the United States that there's many cities in the United States that want to create a citywide wireless network for the residents of those cities at a free or nominal charge. So, for example, cities such as Minneapolis, Philadelphia, cities in Colorado and California are going ahead with plans for creating a citywide wireless LAN. Now, in order to do that, a lot of those installations will require that wireless access points be mounted outside. And in order to mount the wireless access point outside, it's best to place those access points inside an all-weather enclosure. And there are specific enclosures that are created for this situation, for electronical equipment. And these are referred to as NEMA-compliant enclosures. NEMA stands for the National Electronic Manufacturers Association. So let me bring up a picture of a typical NEMA-compliant enclosure for wireless access points. So a NEMA-compliant enclosure is geared for protecting your wireless LAN equipment against dust, rain, sleet, snow, wind, hail, so on and so forth. And within inside the enclosure we have a mounting board for the wireless access point, a place to plug in the power adapter, and then we have the pigtail for an antenna going to an external antenna cable source. And hopefully it'll also have the ability to place a lock on it as well to provide security for the wireless access point. Now, another extremely important question to ask is, what are the bandwidth and roaming requirements for the users on the wireless LAN? So let's bring up another whiteboard and learn about that. Now, in order to provide a satisfactory and productive experience when using the wireless LAN, you're going to need to know how much bandwidth is required on a per-user basis. And you can glean a lot of this information by discovering the type of applications that are being used, that will be used on the wireless LAN. And you'll need to know about the variety of applications that are being used, and if there are different applications that are used depending on the department. So, for example, is the marketing department using heavy-duty graphic applications such as Photoshop and creates large files that need to be transferred along the over the wireless LAN? In contrast, does the company have a warehouse facility where all they need the wireless LAN for is to use handheld devices to scan in items that have been received and items that have been sent? In that situation, typically the applications don't need very much bandwidth at all, just for little scanning applications. So the applications themselves can be a real strong indicator as the amount of bandwidth that is required on a per-user basis. Also, in order to guarantee as much as possible the required amount of bandwidth per users, you'll need to know about the number of users or the concentration of users within a wireless LAN coverage area. So, for example, does the marketing department have 75 users? In contrast, the sales department only has 25 users. So if the marketing department requires a specific amount of bandwidth for those 75 users, you're typically going to require a higher concentration of wireless access points in order to provide the necessary bandwidth that is required on a per-user basis. Now in contrast, because the sales department only has 25 users, you'll need to use fewer wireless access points to provide the same amount of bandwidth on a per user basis for the sales department. Additionally, you need to know about changes in the wireless LAN utilization. So for example, within the company, do people work in shifts? And if so, are there more people working on a certain shift than in others? So if the wireless LAN utilization spikes at certain times, you'll need to provide the number of access points that will meet that spike in utilization. And you also need to know how far the wireless coverage area will have to extend in order to provide for roaming coverage, either for indoor roaming, outdoor roaming, or a combination. So that will also increase the number of access points that are required in order to facilitate the roaming needs of a company. Also, in order to facilitate the creation of the site survey and the installation of the actual wireless LAN, we'll need to know about the resources that are at the disposal of the company. And so that is our next question. Let's bring up a whiteboard and look at that question a little more closely. Now, typically, the most important resources at any given company are money and time. And oftentimes they go hand in hand. But if you think back to your previous question about the goals and requirements of the wireless LAN, if the company has set out very, very lofty goals and business requirements for the wireless LAN, those goals and requirements may not meet the budget that they have set aside for the wireless LAN. So if they have very lofty goals for the wireless LAN but very small budget, well, you're either going to have to meet somewhere in the middle, or scale back their goals for the wireless LAN, or increase the budget that they had set aside for the wireless LAN in order to create the wireless LAN that meets the needs for the company. Also, another very important question is simply how much time is available for this project, meaning when does the wireless LAN have to be up and running? So, and that'll also play into their budget considerations as well. And does the company have wireless administrators that already have been trained on aspects of wireless LANs and how to administer the devices on a wireless LAN? That is also going to have an impact on their budget as well. So are you going to have to add training into the solution that you provide to the company? Or will the company have to use outside vendors for providing training? Or will the company have to bring in contractors to manage the wireless LAN? Again, these are all things that are going to take additional time and typically more money. And ideally, you also need to obtain a blueprint of the facility. And if you cannot obtain a blueprint of the facility for security reasons, you'll typically need to hand draw your own type of floor plan of the facility, which is going to take more time and, as a result, more money. And last but not least, we need to know about the security requirements for the proposed wireless LAN. So let's discuss that by bringing up another whiteboard. So this is an extremely important question. What is the required level of security for the wireless LAN? Do they need any security or just very minimal amount of security? Maybe the proposed wireless LAN is for a little coffee shop and they want to make it as easy as possible for customers to be able to access the wireless LAN. So in that situation, they might have very low-level security, if at all. In contrast, is this wireless LAN going to be installed in a government facility? If so, 9 times out of 10, very specific rules and regulations must be met in order to provide the amount of security that is required for a government installation. In contrast, the building may not be a government installation, but it might be impacted by government regulations. So, for example, earlier we talked about hospitals, and hospitals have to be in compliance with HIPAA regulations to protect patient data and patient confidentiality information. So we'll need to know about, are there any government rules and regulations that might impact the wireless LAN as well. So it is extremely important that we know the security requirements up front, because this is going to have a direct impact on the technology requirements for our wireless LAN. And as a result, we need to find out whether or not the company has a security policy in place. And if they do have a security policy in place, we need to read that and digest that thoroughly before we actually perform the physical site survey. And if the company does not have a security policy in place, you should recommend to the company, especially in this day and age, that they do have a written security policy. And the more information that you can get from a company, it's going to be much easier for creating this site survey. Remember, the site survey is broken up into 2 phases. We're talking about phase 1 in this video. Phase 1 is the preparation phase, where we're trying to glean as much information about the requirements for the wireless LAN before we actually step on site to the facility. So phase 2 will be the actual physical site survey of the radio frequency coverage area for the proposed wireless LAN. And we're going to take information from both phases, the preparation phase and from the physical phase, combine that information into a site survey document, which again is going to be a map and a how-to guide and recommendations for the installation and the administration and the implementation of the actual wireless LAN. So the more information that you can get from the company, the more resources that are available from the company, it's going to make it much easier for creating the site survey. It's going to allow you to create the site survey faster, and as a result, save the company a little time and money. And with that, that brings us to the end of this video. Let's do a quick recap of what we have learned here. So we start off by learning that the site survey is the most critical step for implementing a wireless network, because the site survey serves as a map or as a guide and a reference for creating a wireless LAN that meets the goals and requirements of the wireless LAN for the company. And we learned that the actual creation of the radio frequency site survey is broken up into 2 phases, a preparation phase and a physical phase. In this video, we learned about the preparation phase. And in the preparation phase, we need to ask the client very specific questions in order to create a wireless LAN that does meet the goals and objectives of the client. And with that, that brings us to the end. I hope that this video has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.